So good morning and welcome to the 2017 Forum Conference. Again, I'm Dean Miller, the President and CEO of PACT, and I'm really excited to be here with you today as we really explore trends in enterprise technology and look to the future of digital transformation. For the past hour, many of you have already been educated on blockchain and the applications of Amazon Alexa. Who here attended those workshops this morning? Were they good? Were they good? All right. So let's begin the main program, and I want to start off first by thanking our sponsors, all of our sponsors, but in particular our presenting sponsors. Fairmount Partners and Liquid Hub have been partners of PACT and Forum for many years, and in addition to them and all of our sponsors have provided the essential support for us to put this program on here today. So, on to the program. At PACT, as many of you know, our mission really is to drive innovation by creating spaces and opportunities for entrepreneurs, investors, and enterprises to connect. Through programs such as Forum, we catalyze collaboration, providing opportunities for members of our community and beyond to meet, to learn from each other, and to work together to address the evolving challenges faced by businesses. As you'll learn shortly, our Forum Steering Committee has come together to identify 4 prevailing themes that characterize next-generation enterprise technology. Our committee has worked hard to leverage their experience and industry connections to bring you what I think is an absolutely fantastic lineup of speakers who are all here to help you identify and address business challenges and, most importantly, walk away from Forum with actionable advice. Now, please join me in welcoming the chairs of our 2017 Forum Steering Committee who have led this effort to be recognized here on stage and certainly throughout the day. Alan Bourne of Fairmount Partners and Suzanne Lentz of Liquid Hub.
So thank you, Dean. Appreciate it and glad to be back. I'm Alan Bourne with Fairmount Partners. We're a technology-focused investment bank that serves growth companies all around the world and focus on rapidly growing high-tech companies. We're thrilled to be involved in Forum again, and you know it's great that we've got Jeff Moore here today because the way that we've always thought about Forum is when you think about Jeff Moore's Crossing the Chasm model, it's the technologies that have gotten the early adopters and are waiting for adoption among the larger and more mainstream companies. So it's those just at the top of the first part of the prior to the chasm, and so now we've got Jeff Moore here, and we're thrilled about that, and the focus on how we make sure that we teach folks about the tech and introduce the tech to folks is all about making sure that we can provide good content for CEOs and CTOs and CMOs, and that's one of the things that we've done with this year's cast structure. So I hope you all enjoy. We're thrilled to be back, and we're thrilled to be involved with Forum for I think the 5th year now. Great. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first 2 speakers. Peter Coffey is VP for Strategic Research for Salesforce.com. Peter has been with Salesforce for 10 years now. His global work supports Salesforce efforts in CIO strategies, security practices, and delivery of connected product and big data solutions through collaborations, and account teams in many industries. Prior to Salesforce, Peter spent 18 years as a tech analyst and columnist and editor for IT publications, including eWeek and PC Week. Liz Herbert is a VP and principal analyst serving application development and delivery professionals at Forrester. Liz focuses on the technology services industry, helping clients navigate the fast-changing market and maximize the business value of their technology investment. Prior to joining Forrester in 2002, Liz worked at the U.S. Department of Transportation's Volpe Center, programming a computer simulator to test GPS-based ship navigation, which is super interesting. I hope you all enjoy. Please welcome our first two speakers.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be back. I think this is, well, last year was the only time that I was not able to be with you for Forum, and the time that you've been doing this. And I'm so pleased to be joined by Liz. Liz and I have been having these conversations now for going on 10 years. Sometime within the first month or two after I joined Salesforce, we had our first opportunity to get together and talk about some things that at this point are no longer novel. I've been known to say at this point, expecting someone to be excited by the cloud is like expecting them to be excited by indoor plumbing. It says more about, it's almost an insult to expect someone to think that this is a really cool thing. And that analogy actually has a lot of power, because someone once asked me, well, how do you monetize the cloud? And I said, well, here we are in a big Hilton, big ballroom. Do you think of Hilton as monetizing indoor plumbing? And yet try to imagine building a modern hotel if you couldn't rely on the assumption that you would have that there. But once you have it, it's invisible background. It's the foundation on which you begin to add value. And so when Alan and I talked in November, is this thing going to be, okay, it's advancing on the monitor down there. Can we switch to my deck on the screen behind me, please? Oh, there it is. Okay, that one's working. Great. All right, well, these things happen. When Alan and I talked about what's going to be special about this year's forum, we said, we really want people to understand one thing. This is not a CTO-only event, and it's not a VC-only event. The CMO needs to show up, the CFO needs to show up, and the CEO needs to show up, because this is really now about reorganizing what companies are about. And this whole CAST framework came out of that, because I always feel obligated to explain to Simon, if it's such an obviously good idea, why didn't we do it that way in the first place? And you really have to cast your mind back to, oh gosh, maybe 10 years ago, when connectivity was at the BlackBerry scale, certainly not at the LTE scale. And we built silos because that was the natural thing. Data was a byproduct of business activity, and you captured the data locally. Well, now measure connectivity any way you want. I don't know if you realize this, but those steel cargo boxes that move freight around in the world now, those are no longer priced by the ton mile. They're priced by the ton, because packing them and unpacking them is now the majority of the cost. In fact, on some occasions, you might literally be allowed to send one back free, because they want the box back to bring the goods back in this direction. In fact, if you look at one-way rental rates on U-Haul trailers, you can get an interesting map of economic activity in the US, because there are times when it will cost you 5 times as much to, say, drive from Detroit to Houston as it will to rent the trailer to take back to Detroit, because there's way more people going in one direction than the other. And connectivity has become the measure of activity. It's become the metric of how stuff gets done. And it's about communities, and it's about collaboration created by those communities, and it's about the necessity for one of the 4 pillars we'll be discussing today, which is the use of machine intelligence to make this whole function at scale. Trying to do this with people does not scale to the level that people are now expecting. And so let's talk about the components of transformation, because Liz, I think we can both agree, the way cloud was being tossed around 10 years ago, everybody wanted to be it, but being specific about what was involved in doing it and being able to be precise about, this is the piece you're not getting, and not getting that piece is going to kill you. I really feel that's where we are with digital transformation now.
Exactly, and even with the cloud, one of the things we see with some of our clients who are not leading the way in their industries is that they still view it as something very tactical, where should we use it, how, whereas the leaders, actually cloud and digital are very closely interlinked, because what they see is that cloud is a platform for connectivity.
Yes.
It lets them easily extend into their customers, their partners, their employees worldwide, and it can be the foundation for these new business models that they're striving to achieve. Also, being able to move very quickly, because with these cloud-based models for your operating structure or your end business and your customer engagement, they can make those changes much faster. So we're seeing that is a real challenge. And in fact, a lot of the research we're doing at Forrester around digital transformation specifically is exactly what you said. It's that everybody thinks they're doing digital, everybody thinks they're innovative, but if you look at the reality, most companies, especially large ones, are moving far too slow, and they are under an existential crisis. Many of them will not be around. Already we've seen since 2000 something close to half of the Fortune 500 are not around today, and we expect that to only accelerate going forward.
It's interesting. People do think of being a Fortune 500 company as an accomplishment, but it's really one that takes a lot of effort to sustain. The churn on that list is remarkable. The reason I always lead with connection is that the problem with cloud is that it's a subtractive label. It's these are the things I don't want to do anymore. I want to draw a cloud on a whiteboard and have that just happen. And the problem is that once you've achieved being zero infrastructure, if you're still doing your old business model without infrastructure, it's still your old business model. And I've occasionally pointed out that there is no context in which the verb to cloud something it has any positive associations whatsoever. Let's make this cloudier. No, that doesn't sound like a good thing at all, except in the very narrow context of if you're a legacy IT provider trying to tell Wall Street you've finally gotten it. But connection, generally speaking, connection has almost solely positive associations, and the more connected you get, the more powerful that is. But Liz, beyond just data rate, beyond the bits, what does it mean to be connected? Sure, it's data capture as opposed to data entry, and that's a key distinction. But what are the things you're seeing at Forrester in that area?
The main theme that we're looking at is this idea of many-to-many real-time collaboration. And a lot of clients that we work with, they start out thinking about their employees and their business partners and their customers, be it B2B or B2C, and so you're really talking about consumers. But of course, over the last few years, we've seen this massive shift where connected also means many-to-many real-time collaboration with devices, with everything. And we're just seeing this rapid rise in sensors and in embedded software within the products that we're buying, whether it's a toothbrush that's going to alert your dentist if you're brushing your teeth, or whether it's the car that you're driving around in. We're just seeing that pattern reshape industries all over the world, every industry, and that's been one of the most major trends that we're tracking now. And so it's really all of that coming together because it's the connected devices, the connected Internet of Things, really being able to drive those new customer models, which should ultimately feed back to the engagement between partners and employees and really change the way that your companies are doing business on every level.
Among the interesting things about that is the degree to which the connected part may be the least obvious part. I mean, Jeff and I were, and Liz and several of us were talking at breakfast about Tesla's still an industrial company. They still make a physical artifact, and they need a factory to do that. And some people say, isn't Tesla amazing with what they're doing with electric cars? I have pictures of electric cars from the early 1900s. That's not actually a new thing. But the degree to which Teslas are nodes of a network, so that when one Tesla drives down the street and sees a pothole, that's an impressive piece of machine vision. The next Tesla driving down the street doesn't need to recognize the pothole because the previous one already told it about it. The degree to which these machines are all nodes of a single network that all know what any of them knows, that's not obvious. But it's part of the experience. And in fact, the high-end Porsches and Rolls-Royces now are shifting gears based on what the GPS tells them is around the curve. So they're not even a proprietary network now. They're nodes of a global public network, and that's a remarkable idea, isn't it?
Exactly, and that idea that something can be in real-time reactive. I mean, Tesla is also notable because much like cloud, it's evergreen. They're always getting the latest software updates.
Yes.
They can update your car virtually.
Yes.
And you see the same thing really in other industries. For example, a few years ago, we had a paint contamination issue in China, and one of the leading cloud technology providers who operated a lot of the supply chain was able to reroute customers in real time based on detecting that information, and it was already connected to alternative suppliers, so it could both alert customers that this issue had been detected in the network, as well as change the behavior of those companies automatically in many cases, which is, of course, the beauty of Tesla. The driver may not even know it, which I know is a theme we'll be exploring more throughout the day.
Absolutely. Now, one of the what's the word I'm looking for? One of the badges that companies like to wear to trumpet their connectivity is say, well, we've got an app now. And again, we were talking at breakfast about, if I take a taxi cab and now I order it with an app, I still haven't changed the fact that I'm an asset-oriented business instead of an asset-free business. Moving Uber even from go to the app to having an Uber button that's in the context of the experience you're having, that's a big change. And Liz, I'm wondering what you're seeing in terms of a platform like Android or iOS not being what the operating system was on a PC, which is an application launcher, but really becoming a connective fabric for services. I mean, someone said, won't an iPhone be great when it stops being a bag of hammers and actually becomes a personal assistant. Are we getting there?
Exactly, and today we think of mobile, and at Forrester we talk a lot about these mobile moments, and one of the challenges that we're seeing is to have a great mobile moment, it should be seamless. And in fact, many believe that in the future, it won't be mobile at all. It will be, could even be your thoughts. I know that companies like IBM, they already have technology, they've been showcasing it, where your thoughts can control the action of something. And believe me, I've tried it out myself. Which seems a bit far in the future that we have that already here and now. Of course, we see a lot more with voice recognition. I'm sure most of us don't really touch our phone as much as we speak into it nowadays. And those kinds of shifts we think are very powerful just in terms of making the device or the app experience much more seamless and much more like if you were living your daily life or speaking with a person. But one thing that we've been stressing with our clients and seeing separate the leaders from the laggards is that it can't be all about the app. I mean, I chuckle when you say so many companies are toting these apps now because, of course, it's almost a necessity to do business nowadays to have a great mobile app. But if you neglect the underlying operations of your company, it's not going to be a great customer experience. We were joking about airlines this morning. I mean, how many airlines have this amazing mobile app and then your plane never gets off the ground? Well, that's great that the app was able to give
And
you
the app
all this
accurately informs you of your delays. Yes.
Exactly.
You have been bumped. Yeah.
Exactly.
There was one airline who recently had their app lampooned on the App Store by saying it now had a new drag and drop feature. So, and you all know who I'm talking about. And how long will it be before, irrespective of the merits of their app, how long will it be before that brand stops being a punchline on late night comedy shows? And so understanding, being digital won't make you better. It may merely provide you with a new stage on which you can display what's wrong with your company instead of fixing it. And that's a really serious issue, which leads us actually to the next point, which is awareness. Connection is a technical accomplishment. My engineers can connect me. I can buy connectivity. Making people want to be connected to me is a business behavior, is a business leadership challenge. And I wonder, what are you seeing in terms of your research and your customers, in terms of how do we turn the opportunity of connection into the fact of being seen to create new value from that connection?
Exactly. So when with Forrester, we see everybody's talking about digital, but if you ask everyone in this room, we probably all have a slightly different idea of what that means. And one of the things that we've been talking about is how digital really means finding new sources of value for your customers, ultimately new revenue streams for your businesses. And so if you think about connected, what does that unlock? It might unlock new ways that you can engage your customers. It might unlock new data, probably both, that you can drive new revenue streams off of. And so that's been one of the harder challenges. If you look at all the companies around the world, from Whirlpool is putting sensors on all of their washers, through to the connected cars, the harder part is what new business models can that unlock? So for example, Whirlpool has talked about how through these connected washing machines, they can automate the service experience. And that would be, especially for a company like that who had some very negative customer experience in the last couple of years and damage to their brand, that could be one source of value, really being able to make the customer experience more proactive. Your washing machine can report on itself when it's having a problem. Maybe your smart home unlocks the home so that can be fixed automatically. But what's next? How can they actually think of new services, new products? Maybe Whirlpool becomes other types of home repair if they're going to be doing repairs on the washing machine and the dishwasher. Is there a new business model that they can drive off of that? Can they sell their data to other companies, home builders or insurance agents who might be able to make use of that data? So for most of the clients that we're working with, even when they've started down the path of some of these seemingly obvious moves in terms of outfitting everything with sensors, that's going to be the harder challenge, is how do they reimagine what their business is? You could imagine that a company like Toyota, who of course is a car company, maybe in the future they should be thinking of how can we be an insurer? If we're going to think about this future of self-driving cars and connected cars and telling each other where the potholes are, who's liable when that accident happens? And so that's been the harder struggle, is a lot of organizations.
And Ford's been a good example of saying
exactly.
We're migrating from being a manufacturer of vehicles to a provider of transportation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And especially the larger you are as a company, it's sometimes hard to get outside of your existing and established business models.
Yeah. One of the things we hope you'll notice over the course of the day today is that we've consciously tried to populate every one of the 4 major sessions with not only disruptors who get the pleasure of starting with a blank sheet of paper, but also with pivoters who are in the position of we've got an incumbent brand, we've got an incumbent infrastructure and culture, and the question is, how do we do more than, to borrow a phrase from Jeff, become more than a digitally modernized version of an industrial company, but instead become a digital operation with all that implies. Liz, one of the questions, of course, is we're talking sensors. We're talking 24/7 awareness of what the customer is doing. What is the difference between Platinum Concierge Service and stalking?
That's right.
And because the question of how do you present this to the customer as a value proposition instead of a theft of your data to my own benefit. I call it the Tom Sawyer problem. How do we get people to pay us to whitewash the fence instead of seeing it as a burden?
Well, we're already
Is it just a matter of presentation?
Well, we're already seeing new business models based on this issue alone. There's a company that sprouted out of Salesforce, 360 of Me, I believe is their name, that actually they're looking at what are the ways to monetize data. There are already models like this, I'll probably get the name wrong, but these kind of Ebates type companies where you as a consumer can get more value. In a way, your scan card at any grocery store is this way. You're choosing to give them data about yourself in return for a financial reward. Sometimes the financial reward is actually just a better experience. Sometimes I'm happy to give up some data about myself if it means I'll be greeted at the Hilton as the customer who I am and given the upgraded room. Then of course you can know all the Hiltons I've stayed at my whole life. I would of course give that up, and I think most of us would too. So I think there's different dynamics at play. There's also generational dynamics in terms of comfort level with data sharing, and of course different geographies have different perspectives.
Well, the rationale for this has been phrased with varying levels of tact. Scott McNeely, of course, famously said, "You have no privacy, get over it."
Yep.
Someone else was a little bit more gentle about it when he said, "You have the option of living off the grid. You can spend only cash. You can not use any of these services, and the upshot will be no one will know you, no one will trust you, and you'll pay more for products and services that you'll have a harder time even discovering exist." And so, yeah, that is the choice we face. My wife, knows perfectly well that the little black can with the library lady sitting inside it can do some really cool things. But her reaction to the idea of something sitting there listening all the time, waiting for a chance to be helpful, I said, look, no, if the blue light's not on, it's not talking to the cloud. And she says, yeah.
Well, and
You
saw this.
She's a multi-degreed MIT engineer. She knows perfectly well that blue light may or may not be, in fact, hardwired to that
And you see
switch.
the laws are changing all the time. I mean,
Yes.
Exactly. Alexa is involved as a witness in a murder here in our country, which is...
They wanted to subpoena Alexa.
That's right.
Yeah, which is really a remarkable idea. And in fact, Samsung does warn you that your TV is always listening. Their solution is the disclaimer, as opposed to the blue light.
I confess, I still have the piece of tape over my laptop just in case.
And I understand that it's not uncommon for someone under 25 to have a piece of tape over their camera because they know it's software hackable.
24.
Mark Zuckerberg has been known to say things that are quoted as if he's saying that below a certain age people don't care about their privacy. I actually have a different theory, which is that they do care, but they believe that they should be in control. One of the things that I thought was one of the most important additions to the Facebook interface was that every time you post something now, right there is the drop-down. Is this public? Is this shared with friends? Is this shared with, and you get that granular choice. I think ultimately people wind up sharing more when they get to decide every time, as opposed to knowing that it's buried 3 menus down, and if they want to change the settings, it's going to be hard to do. I think ultimately, the more granular and in the moment you make the choice, the more you encourage people to share, but they really want the option of saying, but not this, and believe that it won't be shared if they say not.
Exactly, and we see it in the enterprise world as well as in our consumer land. For example, Workday, which is one of the leading software as a service companies for especially financials and HR, they have realized that they've got a wealth of data about employees and that they can predict when employees might be ready to leave and why and what corrective actions to take. But that's very sensitive data to pretty much any company that you speak with. And so they've been very smart to not only make sure that is opt-in, so the value is quite high, but also they promote that. And I know Salesforce has gone through very many similar conversations as a SaaS provider as well. So it's not only individual data, but then it's also corporate data. Even if it's only used in aggregate, there's still a lot of sensitivity around it.
Well, let's talk about the other great, big, scary thing in a lot of conversations, at least it's being presented to a lot of people as a scary thing, which is this question of intelligence, machine learning, pattern recognition, the degree to which we can't give people the value they crave without the aid of machine intelligence, and yet at the same time there are all these dystopian conversations about job destruction. Personally, my feeling is that in the same way, as Norbert Wiener said years ago, literally in 1948, there's no wage rate at which a man with a shovel and his 59 buddies with shovels can compete against one guy on a bulldozer. So that looks like job destruction. But on the other hand, there is no way you can be a golf course designer if you've got to do it with people with shovels. You can't shape that hill the way you want to without that power tool. I'd like to look upward at the opportunity to create new value, but I appreciate that that's a dilemma. Now, what are the kinds of conversation you're having with your customers?
Well, exactly. We've been doing a lot of research around this idea of the future of work and around, working side by side with these increasingly, it's not like we don't already work with robots in pretty much any industry, whether it's your computer acting as your, administrative assistant, or whether, you're in an industry where it's a little more clearly automated, like, production and manufacturing has a lot of automation already in it. But what we see is that it will destroy jobs. It will destroy some jobs, but at the same time, it will create new types of jobs. And I think your example of the shovel and the bulldozer is amazing because, if you think about, first of all, the job of shoveling is not particularly desirable. So just us as humans, a lot of the jobs that we would not feel are desirable and that no human would feel are desirable can be automated. And I think most would view that as good. But at the same time, the new potential, like you're pointing out, you can create a different kind of a golf course that you couldn't do with shovels. That is just an example, but we'll see this all over the place, that there will be new kinds of business able to be created through this automation in any industry that you think about and look at. So, the main message we've been communicating to our clients is that net jobs will not necessarily be replaced, but individual jobs certainly will.
There will be a shift. And another thing that will be a byproduct of this is that the floor above which you can be an economic value creator will rise. It used to be high school. Then I think we could argue now it's probably high school plus a minimum of 2 years of community college. They say that private first class in the Army these days has the equivalent of 2 years of community college before they're allowed to run a Patriot missile battery, for example. Because and in fact, number 45 just had a meeting with 50 manufacturing CEOs who said, we've got unfilled jobs in our factories, but the high school graduates that we're getting can't understand the instructions. Now that's partly a failure of user experience on the people designing the modern factory. They should be able to design systems that don't require the equivalent of 2 years of college to know which button to press. But the K through 12 pipeline is a key enabler for this, don't you think?
Well, absolutely, and I think even with education, we're seeing already the shift to more specialized schools. Whether it's the online education, Phoenix University and the like, which has of course changed dramatically in the last decade, but even at a younger age, in high school, I think for most of us here, you were expected to pursue more or less a normal high school curriculum, and many went to liberal arts educations, although we didn't.
No.
But, I think you'll see much more need for that specialized training, whether it's data science, whether it's a specialized type of drone or robot or whatever it might be, because that's going to be what the demands of the future are.
So if you don't want dystopian AI, you want it to be an augmenter of people, well, you need to give it something to work with. And, your talent pipeline is going to be key, and people need to come in the door able to add value to the machine and not just be replaced by the machine. Booth School of Management at University of Chicago looked at an interesting triangulation, if you will, where when the cost of capital went to practically zero around 2009, 2010, the replacement of labor by machinery dramatically accelerated because now you could finance the robot practically free. And so it was clear that people wanted to do that, which brings us to another big question, which is trust. There's something I call a Hippocratic oath for data these days, which is that you have to assure people that you'll collect it respectfully, use it considerately, and manage it rigorously. Because absent any of those three things, they'll say, you know what, I don't want to give you my data. I don't know what you're going to do with it, and next thing I know, you're going to be spamming me with it. Is there, of course, that Salesforce is practically a cliche. We lead every conversation with trust as our number one value. But do you find conversations about trust now starting to become much more widespread as people realize the data of which you have custody is a tremendous asset, but also a tremendous risk?
Absolutely. I mean, we have a large security and risk group within Forrester that's been one of our faster growing teams. You see this both at the consumer level and also at the enterprise level. We're also seeing the rise of standards bodies. For example, in the cloud world, there's been, the Cloud Security Alliance, and the government has done other work on, how do we govern this and how do we think about it as the world is changing, because what we might consider adequate here in 2017 may be inadequate in 2020. So those are some of the key conversations that we're seeing with clients, is that idea of how do we sort of vet the technologies that we're going to work with to drive our businesses. That can vary by different industries, of course. And then also, how do we ensure that that is not a one-time due diligence activity, but that's really embedded in the relationships that we have with any supplier, any technology that we're using, any customer experience that we have. Even the laws are changing over time in terms of, if you have to be HIPAA compliant, what does that mean? Can change over time. Certainly by country, you see a lot of the laws are changing over time as well.
Are legislators and regulators desperately chasing this phenomenon? They seem to me to be 10 years behind. Some of the conversations in DC lately about the ownership rights of data on your internet behavior and things, I feel like they have no concept of what it really means to be living in this world. They think of the internet as something that you use by choice or not. They don't see it as the environment in which essentially now all economic activity takes place. Someone said doing this on the internet now is kind of like saying, well, we're doing this on Earth, as opposed to what?
Yeah.
Try to do business. Try to do business and ignore the existence of the internet. I don't know what that means anymore. So who is going to set the floor? Can we rely on customer sentiment to drive behavior? Will people know and shun the companies that are being careless with it? Or do we need to really work harder to educate regulators and legislators to set a floor that doesn't just become an economically driven decision?
Right, what I see is it's a balance. I mean, of course, government generally, not just legislation around trust, moves very slowly, and that as well has to change. I mean, our government here in the US has been trying to change. You saw Obama, for example, make some pretty significant investments in hiring young, high-priced talent. You've seen, for example, he put in place a cloud czar who may work.
We hired him.
Yes, that's what I thought.
Well, okay, he left and went to Harvard for a little while, and then we said, before you stop that, get over here and get some work done. But,
so, I mean, to me, that you can't really have just the customers governing or just the big companies of Microsoft and Apple and Salesforce and Amazon governing. You do need some legislation. The legislation has to change. But one of the other elements that we see is this idea of education and balance, because a lot of times companies themselves are very slow moving. And so over the 15 years I've been at Forrester, I've had many conversations with especially CIOs or their reports around, the cloud is not secure or this is not secure. And sometimes when you dig into what they really mean, you find they're not really aware of what the cloud is offering, just as using cloud as an example. So sure, there are things you should look at. Where's the data hosted? What's the physical security? What's the logical security? But by the same token, is that same CIO really thinking about, John Smith in the IT department has been fuming mad with the corporation for the last 5 years, and how secure is it really that he has access to your data center?
Yeah.
So that idea of education and what does security really mean in this world? Does the recommendation of peers mean something? And I think we've all seen with Yelp, even that can be manipulated. So all of it needs really a balance.
Another transition that I think has happened is that in the early years of the automobile industry, talking about crash safety was something marketing departments told people not to do because it reminded people that cars could crash. And in the early years of cloud, talking about security, well, we would answer questions about it, but we wouldn't introduce it into the conversation. And now we do. Mm-hmm. Now we introduce and say, if you look at the actual incidents of data breach or privacy violation, they have not involved attacks on clouds, because we do this for a living. They involve attacks on people who thought they could do it themselves. If they can get 5 minutes left off that screen, let me see what I'm actually trying to. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Now we get to unpack these ideas at somewhat greater length with a tremendous group of speakers who've been carefully assembled over a period of months of weekly phone conversations. And so believe me, this is a program that once we had the basic idea, it really created an agenda for us to live up to it, and I hope we will. But I do want to stress one thing. I think you'll understand over the course of the day, this is not a technology strategy anymore. The technology works. You can buy the technology by the barrel and not have to worry about, will the database be tuned? Will the servers stay up? That's no longer the issue. Digital transformation does not mean now you're digital. My observation is, congratulations, you got your shoes tied and got to the starting line. Now you can start to run the race, because you don't get to the starting line of a marathon and have them ask you for your breathing plan for the next 26 miles. You expect to be able to breathe as deep as you need to run as hard as you want. That's where the technology is now. You want more air, breathe harder. But the strategy for running and the will to win are the scarce resource. And I hope that Liz and I have been able to just kind of sketch the outlines that we'll be filling in much more color and depth over the course of the day. And thank you for the chance to begin your day. Liz, thank you so much.
Thanks, Peter.
And I don't know whose job it is to bring the connected session on stage, but it's not mine.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Egan, Senior Director, Enterprise Services for Comcast.
Good morning, and thank you, Peter and Liz, for getting us off to a great start. My name is David Egan. I'm the Senior Director of Comcast Business here in Philadelphia and a proud member of the PACT Board of Directors. Comcast might not be the small boutique firm that you think about when you come to Forum, but I can tell you that what we all share in common here is a passion for innovation and entrepreneurial spirit. I hope you all feel being here at Forum today. On behalf of both organizations, Comcast and PACT, I'd like to welcome you to the Connected section of the day. And when I first think about IT in my life, I think about chasing my brothers around a giant computer IBM mainframe room in the 1980s that my dad was working at Baxter Pharmaceuticals in Chicago. Those giant machines gathered data, and I couldn't tell you what they did with it besides store it, never to be used again. In today's environment, there's more data than ever before, and it's driving business. When it's captured, identified, and used correctly, it can be good as gold. In this next section, we'll discuss the challenges and the payoffs of a 24/7 connected world. The moderator for this session will be Jeffrey Moore. Jeffrey's an author, speaker, and advisor who splits his time consulting between startup companies in the Moore Davidoff portfolio and established high-tech enterprises, most recently including Salesforce, Microsoft, Intel, and just to name a few. Jeff's life work has been focused on market dynamics surrounding disruptive innovations. We'll learn more about Jeff as the day goes on in our keynote address this afternoon. Let's get the conversation started. Please help me welcome Jeffrey Moore.
Look, let me just make a couple of remarks before I bring up the panel. So Alan was talking about crossing the chasm and how referring to this notion of, look, we get these things started, and now what? And the question right now is, when is it time? When is it time to take that next step? And it's adoption. It's an issue of adoption. And so the key to crossing the chasm is, look, the product does work, but it's not clear that it's time for us to modify the circumstances around the product, because it's going to take a bunch of re-engineering of situations. And what you find out in crossing the chasm is, what you're looking for is, what are the use cases that are going to create the occasion and the motivation to transition from one level of infrastructure to the next? That's what this panel is about. So the connected panel says, okay, we now know we're connected. We now know we can pretty much connect anything to anything. But our business models are still predicated on the fact that we're largely not connected. And how much, the fact that we can do it doesn't mean we should do it. And so how do you know when it is we should? So we have three panelists who are going to help us answer that question by sharing with us what I think is the gold of any adoption, crossing the chasm strategy discussion, which is, what are the use cases that appear to matter today, and what are they driving? Let me bring them up one at a time. First, I'd like to bring up Rob Schilling. Rob, come on up, and I'll just put you right next to me here. Rob is the CEO of Space Time Insight, and he's going to share some use cases around asset management and how connected assets can change the operating model of companies and correct for a whole series of problems that we're pretty familiar with for those of us who have been waiting for those airplanes that Peter and Liz were talking to us about when we had the wonderful app. So we'll find out about from asset management. We're then going to hear from Suzanne Lentz. Suzanne, come on up. You were up here briefly before. So Suzanne is with Liquid Hub. They look at customer engagement. So it's a customer engagement agency, and so they're looking at use cases that relate to how do you change the customer experience, how do you change that interaction. We know a lot about that, but how do the people other than Starbucks, other than Apple do it, and kind of when would we do it? And then third, Paul Bovis from GE. So GE has gotten a lot of attention with its recent investments in software and in the Internet of Things, and we're going to see a whole bunch of industrial use cases that will create an opportunity there. So those are the three folks we're going to do. The format is kind of like 10-minute TED Talk, and a kind of a lightning round of questioning, and that gets the first half. We'll have 3 10-minute TED Talks. We have an hour. And then it's going to be Q&A, and I'll be doing a bunch of Q&A, but we have a cool device, which someone's going to bring up to me, which is essentially the iPad that captures your questions. So as you're listening to these things, if your crap detector goes off, send out a question, right? Zero in, and what we'll try to do is quickly get to as many interesting questions as possible, but the focus, again, just to keep you sharpened, is use cases that matter, and use cases that would cause populations of people now to take action in a more unified way, not just the early adopters doing because they have a vision, but there's a whole class of people saying, no, you don't understand. This is how we're going to do it in the future. So with that, let me turn it over to Rob and our first TED Talk, as it were.
Thank you.
And I'm going to steal this chair, and then I'm going to put you at the other end.
Oh, great.
Okay?
Thank you. All right, good morning. I'm Rob Schilling. I'm the CEO of Spacetime Insight, and we're a real-time visual analytics company in Silicon Valley. Very happy to be here in Philly, especially the day of the draft. So excited for that. Good luck.
I'm not even on the list.
You're not on the list?
I'm not on the list.
Amazing. So it's all about connecting enterprises, and we help big enterprises, so industrial companies, how do you digitalize your enterprise? And it's all about that digitalization. And we do that by helping them connect and turn assets into what we call applications. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I know we talked about the Internet of Things a lot. You hear about that a lot. It is real. It's obviously real at home, but it's starting to be real at the enterprise. But it is daunting and it is challenging. So how do you handle that and do it appropriately? And that's what we're going to talk about. But everything is going to have a digital twin. I know GE is pushing this really hard, and I think Paul will probably talk about that a little bit. And that's really taking what are you doing out there in the field, in the operations, replicating that back home at your enterprise, so that you can look at a jet engine, right? You can test it, you can break it, and then bring that back out in the field, right? So it doesn't happen out there during flight. But everything's going to become software as well. That's where we get really excited about it. And assets are becoming applications. The previous speakers talked about Amazon. I think we all talk about that a lot. But it's all about the retail experience as an application. You never think about goods, warehouses, the delivery. You just expect it to be there, right? Uber's the same way. Maybe not in Philly. I've had an interesting experience with Uber. But normally with Uber, you're not worried about the driver. You're not worried about the car. All right? Now you don't even use it because it's cheaper. It's just convenient, right? So if the price goes up, we're probably all going to still use it, or Lyft or other services, because it's so convenient and it's an application. And why now? The reason that we're able to do it now from an enterprise perspective is that, sensors have never been cheaper, right? You can get a sensor for under $10. It's going to drop significantly. Pretty soon they'll be, less than $1, right? And you can now take that ubiquitously across your entire enterprise and digitalize everything. Bandwidth is cheaper. Storage is stronger. There's more cloud services out there than ever before. And now the analytics as well are optimized to be able to go to a device, go to an edge device, which we'll talk about, go to the phone, and then really do that interoperability at scale, which is new, and we really couldn't do that before. And where's the value? The value is really about being able to look at data in context, in motion, and in real time. And, when you're home and you're trying to buffer that movie, it's not a big deal. Your kids might get upset, so you got to deal with it, but that still happens. I just flew in on United. I am a big fan of United, actually. And on United, go Interflight, I couldn't get my syncing to go, right? So I kept spending the $11, and I still couldn't get my email to sync. Extremely frustrating. But you can't do that at scale when you're talking about, a railroad company, when you're talking about an energy company, right? And there's about to be an outage, that's hitting a city. You got to have that real-time connectivity. And you got to have the analytics to be able to take action at any time in the environment. And that's really where the value is. And the real question for these big companies is, are they ready to digitalize their enterprise? That's what we're all here to try to help them do. And we're excited about that. And they're starting to do that. And one thing that's really interesting, going back to the experience with GoGo or downloading a movie, there's so much data coming. And it's really a delicate balance about power and latency. Because you can't take all this data and put it into the cloud. And you can't do that at scale. You're going to be disconnected in rural areas. If you think about trains that are all sensored up and they're going across the country, they're losing connectivity, and they're losing it rapidly, right? So you got to have that balance, and it's about data and bandwidth, connectivity versus resiliency. And really the solution is pulling intelligence down to the edge. And we're talking about the edge, it's not just the phone and mobile devices, but it's down to the sensor, right? It's all the way down to the asset, and making an asset smart. Right? And it's really not about the asset, it's about the data of the asset, which is more important than the asset itself, which is interesting. Right? And then you push the processing up to the cloud when appropriate, and when you need it, and when you're reconnected, and really empowering the endpoints at the edge to make decisions. And that's really exciting to see. And it's happening across some of the leading enterprises today. And then really create that resiliency and independence where you need to. So we have this concept of cloudlets that are in the middle. So you have the big cloud, right, that's overlooking, everything now, the entire world. But then you have cloudlets that are closer to the edge. And you can do that processing before you go up to the bigger cloud when you get reconnected. And it's really powerful at scale. And just a quick example of that before I pass it over to the next presenter. If you take a large rail company, we currently work with the largest rail company in North America. I can't mention their name, but you might be able to guess who that is. It's the oldest rail company in North America as well. And if you think about, they have to put sensors across the entire rail network. It's actually mandated by the federal government. And by 2020, they're going to start getting fines if they're not fully connected across the board. And you think about how much data that is by cart across their entire landscape, it's significant. So our ability is to put onboard tablets onto the cargo containers as a cloudlet so that when you're doing your maintenance calls in real time, you can do that in any area, and you don't have to be connected. And so you can help do preventative maintenance out there in the field. And then when you sync back up, you can sync back up into the larger cloud environment and bring all that data together. Right? So it's really independent of the cloud. So you're not dependent always on the cloud to have connectivity. And then you can connect wherever you want to at any point, and then do that analyzation and controlling throughout the network. And that's really, really important. And it's going to become more and more important as we move forward with more sensors out there. And we're going to see that more and more. And we'll also see it at the home, right? As we're already seeing with the alarm systems, with thermostats. But then when it comes down to critical infrastructure, you really got to understand, how do I solve a problem and solve it quickly? So that's something we'll talk about today.
Great. Before you go away, and then maybe some of the panelists, we've got a couple of minutes here. So the first app, the one that got them across the chasm, sounds like it was a train maintenance app when the trains are in the field.
Correct. Yeah.
are now, once you've got the sensors out there, presumably they can be used for other things. Have you started the dialogue yet about the second use case, or are we still at the first use case only? Where are we with that?
Yeah, no, they're definitely moving to the second and to the third use case.
Do you know what they are? Who's weighing in to say, well, I'd like to be next in line?
Well, asset health is extremely critical across many, many industries. If you take the energy world, there's so much aging infrastructure, you see that everywhere, right? And so how do you look at the health of your asset in real time so that you can get ahead of an outage?
So therefore, I could see this going across industries, saying, okay, asset industry A, B, C. We also have this vision in tech about land and expand. So
Yeah.
I'll get one application at this railroad. Do you have a sense of where, if you were expanding, if I was your sales manager and you're putting pressure on me for additional revenue?
It is quarter end, by the way.
Yeah, so I was thinking about that. So where do you think it might go next? Inside the railroad?
Yeah, in the railroad, it's going everywhere. It's going from looking at preventative maintenance, looking at the health of their assets across the board, looking at taking advanced analytics and looking at washouts.
Okay.
So the propensity for a washout out into the rail. And if you're not familiar with the rail industry, everything is based on velocity. Everything's on analytics. Do not slow down the train. Do not stop it at all costs unless you have to. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars.
Wow.
Per mile per hour. So from that standpoint, yes, they got to look at it across the board. And if you can prevent the next washout, or at least give them a high probability that in this area at this time of day, you're going to have this type of situation, that's tremendous value.
Great. Questions from either of you guys as you're sort of listening to this?
Yeah, I guess the thing that always pops into my head is, what's holding people up from doing it? I mean, some of these things are so obvious. You're working with one of the largest folks, but why aren't the smaller folks doing it? What are you seeing actually is the impediment in people's heads from doing this?
Yeah, I think one is, just like big data, there's a misnomer about the Internet of Things. It's not about the Internet of Things. It's really, and that's not an industry to us, it's about the digitalization of your enterprise. So companies are starting to invest in that.
Don't
Yeah.
worry. This is an Internet of Things right now. Okay.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.
But I also think it's looking at the budgets, Paul, and that's always an issue, and trying to invest ahead of a problem versus always reacting to a problem and then trying to solve it.
Great. We'll get thanks. Please thank Rob for his
Thank you.
talk. Thanks. Yeah. Right. So again, Paul's question is, again, eventually we're going to do a lot of these things, and particularly as you have your second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth use cases, more and more of the infrastructure is already there. And so all you're really doing is the marginal cost of adding the next application descends. So what's critical is your first, second, and third ones. And that's kind of where we're spending some time on. So speaking of first, second, and third use cases, Suzanne Lentz, as I said, is part of Liquid Lab. Liquid Lab has been working with the marketing side of the house on digitalizing customer experience. Suzanne, please come up.
So we're going to focus on how we talk about being connected. And here at Liquid Hub, we look at being connected. To successfully be connected with your customers or operations, you have to start with an empathetic approach. Since companies have an ocean of data, what they need to do is first understand the insights. They need to find the insights that allow them to understand what's important to the person that they're crafting a solution for. Without first starting this empathetic approach, they really don't know what they don't know, to steal that from Liz earlier this morning. In this TED Talk, we'll highlight how 2 companies are using their data to create insights for their business.
You got a conference model.
Yep. Thank you. So let's name a list. You have mice, rats, termites, ants. Basically, there are a lot of things that might be leaving your house that you don't want. You need to get rid of them. When you think pest control, most people think John Goodman, they think arachnophobia. You're definitely not thinking IoT, you're not thinking data, you're not thinking about customer experience. So Orkin knew this. Orkin's one of our clients. You might consider to be more of an industrial company, and they said, how can we compete? How can we make sure there aren't some new upstarts that can not have the infrastructure that we're carrying? How can we become more digital? But they didn't know how. So they first started with looking at the customer journey, trying to really understand the pain points both on the customer side, the operations side, and with their employees. They had a lot of data on their customers, but they weren't optimizing the operations. They really needed to lower their costs, and they really wanted to be able to charge a premium to their customers. Through this, we looked through where the pain points were, and we mapped certain digital tools that could alleviate these pain points. So the first thing we did is we built a better mousetrap, basically. So this is the prototype, and it was just some Arduino code, Raspberry Pi, sensors, and a camera. And I don't know about you, but we personally had squirrels in our attic. It's a horrible experience. You live in Philadelphia, you can't even kill the squirrels. You have to trap them, take them 10 miles away, release them. So you have to hire a service.
Closer to Pittsburgh?
Exactly.
Just checking.
So with that, you have to hire a company, and they'll put traps in. Either you have to go out every day and check them, or they can charge you extra for them to come out every single day because it's inhumane to kill the squirrels, even though they're chewing through your wires and doing everything else. So this is both a pain point for our operations. It's a pain point for the customers because they're going out there and they're going to forget, and some actually really don't want to kill the squirrels. So he said, how about we build this trap that when the door shuts, a picture's taken. It sends the picture to both the homeowner and the service rep and says, what's in there? Is it the house cat? Do you want to run up there right now and get the house cat out? Is it a raccoon? Is it a squirrel? Or was it just a false alarm? Is the trap somewhere accessible where the homeowner can open it up? Greatly improve the customer experience. They were much happier about it. They actually felt like they're, getting a great service. It's pretty expensive to get rid of rodents from attics or basements and such. And so that's great in the customer experience side, but what Orkin then found is they started using this in their commercial operations, especially food manufacturing. And they started getting a massive amount of data of how often are the rat traps being clicked? Why are some rat traps being clicked more often than others? And they started looking at the behavior of mice coming into their production facilities. So they actually could now use that data and greatly lower the type of infestations that they were seeing in their facilities. So it started as an IoT, it started as customer experience, but it really greatly affected operations for food and drug, and those people have much more brand love for Orkin through that. Wow. And then from that also is, and this is really just more of on a customer experience side, many people don't believe the Orkin guy actually came to the house. And they don't really believe that up in the attic they saw this and the damage was that great, but they don't really want to crawl in the attic to see what they're seeing. So we developed another prototype, and this looks horrible, it looks like a Hubble telescope on the side, but now it's just on the helmet and out of the pilot. And with that, they send real-time video, again, to the homeowner and also back to operations. So now the operations know that the Orkin guy really did come to the house. They really did spend 20 minutes, and here's all the video to prove it, again, showing value. Now there's a lot more unstructured data, and phase 2 is what are they going to be doing with this unstructured data moving forward. Yeah. So using data, Orkin's really using a show, don't tell approach. They're looking at behaviors of mice and rats, and they're actually able to improve the customer experience and lower costs on their operations. On this panel, we also talked about how it's increasingly important to capture customer behavior and intentions so that businesses can understand what to do next. In this case study, I'll talk about the challenges and rewards by using customer data to predict customer desires. Another glamorous industry, home building. Everyone has built a custom home, but typically when you build a custom home, you go into this big, ugly warehouse, you have to buy the land, it's a very long process, you have to buy the kitchen cabinets first, you don't know what kind of house you want. Edward Andrews Homes had some funding, and with the funding said, how can we be different? How can we compete with Toll Brothers? So let's be more digital. We're more nimble, we're smaller, we don't have the kind of infrastructure they have. So they turned to us, and again, they started with the customer journey map. What are the pain points of the customers, and what are the pain points in our operations? And this journey map really uncovered that people don't know what they want when they buy a house. They think they know what they want, but do they really know what Beaux-Arts, or do they know what modern? Do they know what classical, colonial? Do the husband and wife or the two people buying the home, are they in agreement? And with that, there's a lot of angst around buying a home. There's a lot of money you're spending. So we create a Myers-Briggs type app. So we didn't ask them, do you want yellow or green? Do you want modern or classical? Because they don't really know what those terms are. We kept showing them pictures. And they said, which picture do you prefer? A, B, A, B. And it kept just going through. And then we built an algorithm that, depending on what they selected, we could see what their style is. And we also can see, because they're both taking it separately, is if they're actually synchronized with their styles. And this has gone out thousands and thousands of times, and we now can predict what style they are. So now, this is the showroom they have now. It's not an ugly warehouse. They come into this really sleek, highly designed studio, and the EA Homes reps pull out the materials that they think they want. Certain tiles, certain cabinets. They don't have to be in this huge warehouse. It's a much better experience. But what's really more exciting is that they accelerated the home buyer move-in date by 42%, just from this Myers-Briggs data that they collect. Can you imagine if you move in 42% faster, the capital that EA Homes now has, the working capital has greatly increased. So on operations side, they have more money to use, they have more money to invest, they can buy more real estate, they can grow more quickly, and the customer experience, they move in much faster. So in these two case studies, what we're really emphasizing is you have to understand the pain points first. You have to really understand both the customer and operations. What are you trying to solve with your data? How do you move from being an industrial company to a digital company? How do you make sure there are no upstarts that takes away your business?
Cool. Is that it? Cool. Well, so I have a bunch of questions, and again, if you're having questions, if you have challenges, send them through to the text them through, and we'll have them after this. So I'm listening to this. I think both of these situations are emotionally charged. One is, I have pests in my house, but they're squirrels. And the other is, we're going to get a new house. Oh, my God, we're going to fight about it for 6 months. In both cases, what you were trying to do is intervene with digital to address the pain point. I mean, talk a little bit, I guess, more about how did you think to do let's do the house first. How did you think to say, I need to generate a Myers-Briggs test? What spurred you to do that?
So by first making the journey map to say, what takes so long? Where's the pain coming from? Like you said, the angst that they have trying to make a decision. And then we have these workshops that we call Think Fast. Yeah. And in these workshops, we sit with both the prospects, people who may be going through this process, as well as people within the company, to better understand, what's going on? What are some of the fights you see? Where is it really coming from? And saying, so it really came down to understand, if you knew what kind of style they had and what they wanted, would that make your life easier? Yes.
Got it. Okay, let me go to the other one then. So basically, because I think I'm going to ask a general question in a minute, but let me try the first one. How did you know what the problem was with Orkin? Was it competitors, or was the customer experience not right? Were they having? Where was their journey map, and what happened there?
So Orkin does a lot of. They collect a lot of data on customer service. They've been doing a lot of research. They send surveys out. They understand what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. Not always able to fix it, but they've been collecting a lot of research.
This is a subtle hit that we might have gone over. It's all right. Okay. I'm going to make a point then.
So they had a lot of data, but not necessarily know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And by looking at where they're spending a lot of money on operations needlessly, that actually sparked the first conversation of, if we don't have to send these trucks out, we could save some money, and if we could record it, the customer also gets a better experience.
Okay, cool. So first of all, thanks, Suzanne. Before I bring her up, I just want to make a point. So the journey map time, an unnecessary delay in the journey map is a proxy for an ill-designed process. And that's kind of what happened. And I think basically, in the case of an inappropriate number of truck rolls became the sign. You still have to decode it, you still have to do the thing, but I do think that when we're looking for use cases for digital structures then, they're very simple signs, and probably time is the one that if you track time instead of cost, I think you'll get there faster, because that'll be the first signal that there's something wrong with this process, because it's just taking too long. With that, I want to turn over to our third speaker, Paul Bovis from GE, VP of Manufacturing. I happen to love the name of their product, called Brilliant Manufacturing.
Brilliant manufacturing.
Brilliant manufacturing. I did, that was not something I'd put two words together in my past life. I want to hear about it in my current one.
So I'm actually a manufacturing person. First of all, it's great to be here. Thanks. And not to have to get on a plane to go and meet with somebody. I live outside of Philadelphia. We talk about brilliant manufacturing. I would actually just prefer to have mediocre manufacturing or mundane manufacturing. It's not the concept of brilliant things. It's the concept of using data to drive a process incredibly reliably, repeatably, without a lot of friction, right? So you got to come up with a catchy name. Came up with brilliant manufacturing when I was at SAP. It was perfect plan. The concept and where I want to start your thinking is, if you haven't seen this example, it's a great way to kind of look at machine learning. And Google does this where they taught the machine to play Pong. Anybody ever play Pong? I played Pong, kind of date ourselves playing this game. And what it did was, it's just tell the machine, here's the paddle, here's the ball, keep the number going up, as opposed to writing a lot of code that says, here's exactly how to play this game. And after merely 2 hours, the machine actually learned to play as well as I've ever played the game. And what gets really interesting is after about 4 hours, the machine learned the trick to playing Pong, which is drill a little hole up the side, get the ball to rattle around by itself and do all of the work for you. If you played Pong, that's kind of the holy grail of getting the high scores. If you haven't, it's not a third-person shooter game, so it's maybe not that cool. But the idea is to connect to the data, to actually start to learn from the data, and then to start to optimize around the data. We used to do these ads. People think it's a cool marketing term, get connected, get insight, get optimized. But in manufacturing, we do it backwards. We know all of the rules, and we attempt to write and embed those in code, and then learn after we deploy those rules, and then actually optimize after we've deployed things that we maybe shouldn't have, not deployed things that we should, and we create a tremendous amount of cost. And we do this with experts. And Andy McAfee did a talk a couple years back at one of our conferences, Minds and Machines. And two things that really stuck with me that he talked about were the second half of the chessboard, technology. Now, think in the context of manufacturing and making things, and making really large, complicated things. Thousands and tens of thousands of parts, turbines, incredible precision. And the second half of the chessboard concept was, he used an example of some peasant does something for the emperor, the Chinese emperor, and gets rewarded. And what do you want? I want a grain of rice. I want you to double it on every square of a chessboard over time. What happens halfway through the chessboard? It's about a good year's harvest. At the other end of the chessboard, the second half, it's actually more rice by volume than the planet Earth, and the emperor figures this out, beheads the peasant, and whatever. Doesn't like the fact he got played. But they did this, and they said Moore's Law and the emergence of the internet. And about 2006, we've started to increase a rate of advancement, or approach a rate of advancement that exceeds our ability to imagine some of these things in kind of the Star Wars realm, right? Think of science fiction, it's like Westerns now, right? We're not even doing the Star Wars and the Star Trek type of thing. So that's number one. We're in the second half of the chessboard. Waiting 1 year to start to adopt is like waiting 5. It's kind of like dog years, IT years. The other thing he talked about is this concept of experts and algorithms. And they did a study of studies, and they found that experts are right exclusively about 6% of the time, or you could trust the expert overall about 50% of the time. You could trust the algorithm 90+% of the time, right? Data-driven process. Who's shocked? Anybody? Nobody. Except for the fact that over the last decade or so, couple decades, our industrial productivity's dropped from 4% to 1% year-over-year growth. So we know data should drive the process. We put in more systems. Somebody talked earlier about capital costs went down. We put in all this technology in these robots. And what we got for it is we got a drastic collapse in our ability to be productive in operations. It's actually, the newest numbers are down around 0, probably 0.5%, 0. I think it comes from, in large part, our willingness to create silos of data in operations that can't be linked or easily crossed. We put in a system to do a certain thing. I have a quality test procedure for this device in this part of this plant that was actually written by this expert, might be written in Access Excel VB, might have bought it from an SAP, might have bought it from somebody else, but it's so siloed, it doesn't actually allow us to expose the data in a much simpler way. And part of the excuse we use this for is because the cost of being wrong in one instance is so incredibly high, I need an expert system in one place, right? Last night at 9 p.m., I'm in New York City meeting my wife and my daughter. My cell phone goes off, and the alarm at the house went off. Burglar alarm went off. And this fast, I said, which alarm was it? They said it was this alarm. I said, oh, I logged in to my mobile device. I looked at every other alarm and every other trigger. There was only one. That one device is where the dog is when we're out of town. The dog set off the alarm. I reset all of the criteria for my alarm system, and I said, just trigger an alert to me. Don't alarm the cops anymore, because it's the dog. I'll be there in 2 hours. I did that from a mobile device from New York in 6 minutes. I have $1 million pieces of equipment that I can't configure that way in an operation. The locomotive that's running down the rail, we talk about self-driving cars, that locomotive should only be under power at certain spots, because if I can actually see around the corner, as the earlier example, what I would know is don't apply power because I'm going to be coming up on a hill. I'm going to drain that power. Or as I crest the hill, I actually want it to pick up its own steam, use regenerative braking, charge the batteries, all these types of things, right? I have to create, we use this concept of a digital thread. So in that bubble chart, the lower left side of that is where the machine and the people and the material and the recipe actually intersect, where I actually make something. And the upper right is where the customer gets control of that. I've got to create a bidirectional flow of data so that allows me to move information very seamlessly and quickly. And that's different than putting in systems. That's different than putting in one more application with a use case and a database and connectivity and a UX. It actually says, just hook to the data, exploit that data. Somebody said earlier about amortizing the cost of the connection down every time. Once I make that connection to the machine and say, let me tell you how to cut that part, let me understand how you did cut the part, now I can actually send another piece of data that says, reconfigure the guard doors on that machine because there's a new safety requirement. Maybe don't even have to send a mechanic out there. The chasm in the manufacturing space is not whether or not the technology exists, whether or not we can do these things. It's whether or not the leadership in the business has the courage to say, we're not going to do the way we used to do it. It's just that simple. It's a leadership issue. The tools and techniques all exist. We've created this operating system for the industrial Internet of Things. It goes from the edge. How can you listen at the little brain? I call it the little brain. The device, the machine, the locomotive on the rail. How do you attach that to the big brain so we can do the types of things that Google's doing and others are doing with machine learning? I can't do that Pong game if I'm not connected to the edge, bringing that data up in a time domain that allows me to actually impact the process. That is hypercritical. You've got to be able to secure this. And this concept of a digital twin, which is really, it's the genome for machines. It's not the CAD model of the device. It's not what did this look like when it shipped. It's what did this look like when it shipped, and how is it degrading over time based upon the performance that's applied to it, so that I can understand exactly when, where, how, what to do to that machine to get the outcome that I expect. A jet engine that flies through the Middle East continually on a particular carrier starts low and slow out of the airport, sucks up more dust, creates more heat-related issues in the shroud, as compared to a jet engine on a short haul in the US. You can't treat them the same. They are not the same thing. That's where the data starts to unlock these use cases in the manufacturing plant. So what you see on this screen is the lean operating system for the Grove City remanufacture plant. So think of a locomotive, machine that wouldn't fit up on this stage, comes back after 10 years in the field. It gets torn down to the lowest level parts, cleaned, measured, refurbed, thrown away or put away, pulled back out and rebuilt and put back out as a refurbished locomotive. There's a recipe for doing that every time. Guess what? There are parts on that core that have gone 20% past their life cycle. Why would you even clean them to inspect them, to learn what you already know, because that data was actually in the silo in the field. The last service engineer knew there was a problem with that. That data never made it back to the plant. All we did was connect it to, expose the data. Now it's about $10 million worth of savings simply by using a digital connection between sets of data that already existed. So start with where you're going, how you're going to extract the value, and what the tactics are. And I think you mentioned about the time delay in your tactic is a reason to pivot off. If people don't like it, if they don't want to use it, if it's not bringing the value, kill it and do something else.
So we're going to go to open questions, but just one quick question. So most of the world is siloed at any given point in time. What are you guys doing to create these bridges that allow, like a common bus, if you will, to communicate?
So if you think of that operating system concept for the industrial internet, it's completely different how many cups of coffee from Starbucks in Philly this morning. That's the Internet of Things. The amount of data that came off the pair of engines that landed at Philly when I came back from Doha a few weeks ago is completely different. The variety of velocity. So we're actually building out infrastructure that supports the weight of those kinds of use cases and actually speeds the connectivity to the edge, to the device, to the sensor, and is open so that folks like Suzanne's company and Rob's company can say, look, I've got a use case I can bolt right up to it. Because it's not going to be a GE thing. It's going to be a GE and liquid analytics and space-time insight thing along with the rail company.
Yeah, cool. All right, thank you very much. We have this thing here. Okay. So I have one question. Now, that's what we call lame, okay?
Light.
So I'll tell you, now, this is maybe one of these human things where we don't digital. Just, I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm an intervener. Anybody like to raise their hand? Just like try a question. We need some questions for our, I'm going to start with some questions, but I really do think that this is going to be a lot stronger. So actually, use your system, okay? How do you do it again? Could you put up the request here? By the way, we do have one clarification already. The Game Impulse machine learning example is not Pong, but Breakout. So for those of you who are really into that, but by the way, it's okay. It's okay. But I have a question here. But so please use this. Some of the okay. So this is, I think, for everyone. It's a general question. So some of the inefficiencies solved by these technologies discussed actually result in lost revenue to the supplier. Right? You actually make it better, but I used to charge people. Like if I have a faster taxi ride, I might get less on that fare. Any thoughts about do you see that in any of the use cases that you deal with? And if so, do you have any thoughts about overcoming it?
So look, I'll take a step. There's a paper from GE from like 2011, Marco Annunziato, the chief economist, talked about it, where the ability to use these technologies is going to harvest $15 trillion for the global GDP. The question really is, does the buggy whip manufacturer lose revenue? The use case that's no longer valid loses revenue, right? And what's actually happening for people who understand it, who actually deliver these solutions to change their business to an as-a-service business, Toyota as a transportation company, Uber as really a data supply chain company, not a rideshare company, are just, they're actually creating a lot more opportunity than they are destroying in that use case. If you're hiding behind, hey, this is the way we always did it, you're
Rob,
done.
I saw you nodding.
Well, I would just add to that. I mean, if you think about Amazon, and we all think it's most amazing company out there from a digitalization perspective, it's interesting that they have, when you look at their annual report, they have $29 billion of hard assets on their books. So they're really transforming an industry, but and they're creating jobs. It's just in a different place. So it might not be in a retail shop, but it's going to be somewhere in a supply chain, somewhere out, in North America, right? So they are creating and augmenting other jobs, and people just have to retool. Is the key.
I just want to add to that before I bring Suzanne on. So one of the things that's happening is, as the digital economy is doing this, and the industrial economy is doing this, we're at a transition point, or kind of a stall between S-curves, where we're destroying more jobs than we're creating now. And now, that's because you're at the beginning of one, and you're kind of at the end of the other one. So it's going to create a bunch of political and social issues that are they're unavoidable. And so I don't think we should say, well, the digital economy is going to take care of everything. Yeah, but in a future that's pretty far down the pike. So we have to deal with the transition in some sort of temporary, constructive way.
Yeah, earlier today you mentioned about 20 years ago there was more demand than supply, but through globalization and technology, there's actually more demand, there's more supply than demand. And with that, the customer is king, and they have these expectations. So with these rising customer expectations, companies actually have to provide more services, more personalization, easier, valuable, better experiences. And with that, while you might be replacing some people in operations, for example, less people have to service the traps, but you may have to now provide other services to meet their demands.
Okay, and that speaks to one, let me kind of do a follow-up here, because there was a question about how do you convince clients to use already existing data for other use cases? So like the Orkin folks may want to do that, or the, your other example was the designers, or the home makers. You have a first use case, any of you, I guess, it's that land and expand question. So what can you share about that?
It's all about, unlocking the value of the data. And I think, all these companies want to do that, so they need ideas, right? So companies like Suzanne's to come in and unlock, those ideas of how they can, translate that data and get value out of it, is something they're pushing for.
I think, by the way, as being in the IT industry for 35 years, when we say the word data, we actually think we know what we mean. When we say the word data to somebody outside of IT, it means absolutely nothing. It's an abstraction that does not, so that's why these use cases are so important, because the use cases bridge the gap between the two things. But Suzanne, in your world, like other use cases, is your business like finding use cases? Is that what you do for a living?
Yeah, for example, we work with a national grocer that is great data, great loyalty programs. People really enter their personal data in. But this grocer had an ideal image of the person who's shopping, that they're relaxed, they're going in, they have their lists, but in reality, I see someone here that was working with the client, and she went out and actually shopped along and realized the person was usually harried, they have a child screaming, the list is falling on the ground. And so this grocer had beacons that they put in. And because they already had all the data, they knew exactly what was on their shelves. They actually could create a shopping list for the shopper that's in the rows of the aisles to make the experience better.
Cool.
So it's using that data in a whole different way to improve their experience.
Started with empathy, though, with the shopper. I wanted to, this is for you, Paul, and it relates to a couple questions here. So we're moving toward the Terminator syndromes, we're working to the systems, right? And there's this, you said at one point, the risk of failure is so large. So in an autonomic world, how do you manage accountability for risk? How do you handle the politics of risk, the liability of risk, even though your data-driven process may be more reliable than a human-driven process? We have a lot of human institutions which say, well, but the driver is in charge of the cart, and at least I know who to sue. So
Right.
how do you see that?
I think it goes back to what you just talked about. How do you unlock the value proposition and start quickly to move the process forward? So, for example, the example I used of the jet engine ingesting dust. That's a real example from GE. We had an engine that had a premature pattern of failure in a certain region, and the FAA doesn't like that. For obvious reasons. We don't like it either.
The passengers are replaceable, but it's
People get a little
bad for
weird
them.
about that.
It's bad,
right?
It's bad, yeah.
I'm not trivializing it. I mean, it's an important thing. But the response is, take them all off and figure it out.
Okay.
And engineers will say, let's figure out which ones we should be looking at first. And we were able to use and apply additional data into the digital twin that existed and say, here's why we're missing it in this one versus this one. And then actually convinced regulatory bodies to allow data to drive the process. But it only came after you could say, I can show you an example that I can demonstrate quickly, I can document the value, I can show it's repeatable, and then everybody starts to take 2 more steps toward it, and then you do it a little bit bigger in another place and 2 more steps toward it.
And we know that regulated industries can only move at a certain
Exactly.
at a certain pace. I have a question about GE, by the way. Any specific examples of clients that are leading in this space, setting the bar? I mean, who should we be looking at from your client base to say, these are early adopters we might be able to learn new use cases from?
So I would look at the GE individual business units, the aviation business, transportation business, healthcare. There's 8 business units. GE Digital is really a compilation of the technical resources that drive the data models. Companies like food and bev companies like P&G are doing some really interesting things in their operations. Companies like Schindler, the elevator and escalator folks, are the Toyota example, right? People think of elevators and escalators. They think of building envelope management, how you move people more effectively. So if you could listen to all of these devices and understand how they're impacting the flow of people in an area, you can actually improve it. And I heard a story, I'm not sure it's true, but you know, when you swipe your badge and it buzzes and you're not supposed to go in, but you go through, they're actually finding ways to mark that individual, a red light that comes on over their head and tracks them, right? Think of the airport, right? When they go through the wrong way and the alarm sounds and they can't find them, if they were bathed in red light, most people would run from them and the rest could run to them. But this is a data thing, right? So they're thinking about these things that seem a little weird and outside the box. They're actually finding a way to deploy it in an environment like this that's not so, freaky.
So it is interesting, and this is kind of maybe for all of you again. So when these things are applied to impersonal assets, you say, okay, I get running a better train, okay, I'm fine with that. When they're applied to highly personal things, like you know everything I've ever read and ever searched on my browser, I'm feeling a little sketchy about that one. And I'm trying to think about the intersection, and so I'm thinking about things like, let's just take self-driving cars. Where do you see that? How should we think about use cases where human responsibility and digital responsibility intersect? Do you have any insights into those kinds of use cases?
Yeah, we're dealing a lot with hub operations and trucking, right? So, you can't, and the companies can't mandate the driver to get tracked because, that's a union issue, and the drivers don't like that. But once the drivers are starting to see value, that they can do their job faster, get home quicker, and potentially even be more profitable from a bonus perspective, they're opting in, to start, having systems that are tracking them, right? And I think that's starting to happen.
Other thoughts about this? From my exam, one of the things I'm seeing is that, look, the technology, if you apply digital technology to an industrial model, you're normally taking time or cost out of the model. I mean, you're taking friction out of the model, was what Paul was referring to. That inevitably is going to create conflicts of interest with people that are unions or that have labor or that are concerned about. It's clear that when you create digital models that are digital models, they create new jobs. So Amazon's doing a bunch of hiring and whatever. And so I think the issue is going to be, how can we build the next thing fast enough going forward? Okay, how prepared are our graduates for this? As you guys are doing hiring, okay, so what's the new workforce look like, and what are you looking for someone different this year than you might have looked for 5 years ago?
So it's a struggle in manufacturing. There's a lot of unfilled roles in manufacturing because, the feeling from the manufacturing side is that the candidates don't show up with the right fundamental skill set. It was mentioned earlier is, if you simplify the use case, then it should be easier for them to do that. I think the technology can bring people on speed quicker. So I was at Komatsu in Japan a few weeks ago, and the CEO told me how they trained a 20-year-old office worker to drive a large piece of earth-moving equipment in 3 days because they augmented their capability with the digital footprint that then said, hey, you do these things and the machine will do these things and you do it. So I think, we have a lot of training programs where we bring people in. I think we need to have people who think differently about solving problems because you can't come into the space and say, here's all the blocks, here's how they fit together, that's going to be our next business model. They got to think outside, and if you can tap a little bit what goes on with gaming and social and leverage that as a plus, I think there's a way to maybe harness that.
We're talking a lot out in Silicon Valley about design thinking. Frankly, Suzanne, some of the things you sound is design thinking part of your hiring spec these days, or where are you these days?
Yeah, and so when we think about getting the right people for the right jobs, one great thing about PACT is they're focusing on really bringing together universities, technology, capital, people with the entrepreneurial spirit, and make sure they stay in Philadelphia. We compete a lot with people having the glamorous of moving over to Silicon Valley, but I think Philadelphia, it was announced yesterday, just had a higher growth than Silicon Valley of younger people staying there and moving there. So that's fantastic, because it is hard to find the right people in the right areas. And also we still need to put more money into education. So I don't want to turn into a political conversation, but yes, we need more people in STEM to, because you need a combination of designers, creatives, and technologists.
So there's a bunch of questions about the land and expand idea. So again, in any of your client situations, as you watch a customer, I think the interest now is like, what was have they gone to the second one? The question specifically, Rob, for you is, how many space-time clients have gone beyond their first to their second? And anything you could share about that?
Yeah, I mean, almost all of our clients, and we have over 30 major enterprises using our software. But one example is we entered in, and I think if you can visualize data and make it visual, it starts catching fire with operations and the business folks. So we have done that for another major rail company, where we tied their operational systems with their dashboards. So in their operation meetings, instead of having static dashboards, they can now drill down into the maintenance records. They can now drill down right into the cargo levels. And the executives coming in have to be prepared, because they can't hide behind the data anymore. So we started there, and then we built them a safety application. So we kind of, you kind of build your credibility. And I think this goes back to your question, Paul. Especially on advanced analytics, everybody wants to try it first. They want to see it out there before they roll that in, especially into jet engines, et cetera, when lives are affected. So we built that safety application, which is the next advancement of analytics. And then we got into more advanced analytics and solutions.
So, by the way, you talked about sensor pricing, and you said now $10, and you sort of forecasted $1. I remember that at one point Walmart was going to put RFID tags on every single item in the store, but the RFID tag had to get down to cents per thing. Do you see that? Do you see Moore's law just driving that to essentially marginally zero?
Absolutely.
And how soon do you think that happens?
I would say the next 5 years. Yeah, Paul?
So let me give you a specific example. So the land and expand, it impacts that too. So the current GE current, our energy business, light bulbs don't burn out like they used to. They're LEDs, they last for a decade. So that's a bad business model.
What's the matter with you guys?
It's kind of weird. But the device can now be sensor enabled. So in San Diego, they just announced Smart City, where the street lamp is actually got a camera and a microphone. If there's a gunshot, the streetlights can triangulate the sound and help pinpoint where the gunshot came from. In a retail outlet, if I open my phone, the LEDs can be configured to pulse at an individual frequency that can fix your position within 10 centimeters, and they know that you're in front of the diapers versus the Doritos. Great use case. I looked at it and said, that's got to be in every plant, because plants are trying to figure out how to relamp for the energy savings. That's like 12th on the list. They're trying to figure out how to track inventory. That's like 12th on the list. If you combine relamping and tracking inventory, so now in the lighting plant, they put a Raspberry Pi on the forklift. It's tracked. They get a heat map from the lights. They found out that while they're ordering new forklifts, they only use them 60% of the time, so they're not utilizing the assets they have. They also found out that if I run the math that says when this forklift is on a dock in proximity of a trailer and it disappears from view and reemerges 30 seconds later, that can be called a put away, and I can do a zero-touch transaction. So I don't know if the cost of the sensing comes down to zero, but the cost of everything else, when you amortize it, it drives cost out at an unimaginable rate.
And this is where the new jobs come from, by the way. So they don't come by, in other words, you eliminate one layer of jobs by making a resource effectively free. But whenever you make a resource free, you create a whole new economy around it. In fact, that gets to one of the questions we have here, which is there's some entrepreneurs in the audience that are building new companies. They're trying to figure out if you're I'm going to put you in the M&A business. So each of you gets because it's a draft, right? Today's the day. So you can draft one startup for your company. What would that startup be doing? Where's a company that you say, boy, I would like to spend my M&A draft choice on a company that does this? Any one of you guys. We would give you your next capability that would take you to the next level.
Everybody hates when I use this example internally, but I want a
make you answer
paintball
too,
gun.
Okay, so think about it.
I want a paintball gun that I can fire paintballs at machines and have that be the sensor that automatically configures and starts pulling up data about is it running hot, is it running fast, is it running slow. I want to make it that seamless to connect to a legacy or a heritage asset.
It's not. Yeah.
Forget about your UX, forget about your data model, use
yeah.
space-time insights.
So let me give you, I have a smart building. Honeywell did some stuff, Rockwell did some stuff, whatever. By the way, they did it 25 years ago. It's on different wires.
There's no money to upgrade it.
There's no money to upgrade
Yep.
it. Okay, so a paintball machine will solve this?
Instantaneous connection to legacy
A paintball
assets.
machine is going to give you this instant.
Just so I can shoot everything and get it all connected.
Do you have any idea, like, how would you even imagine that was possible? What category is this company in other than magic?
So look, our global research folks come up with some really incredible inventions. I mean, the ability to 3D print sensors into objects is available today.
Yeah.
The ability to affix sensors and strain gauges to objects remotely is available. These things are all available. I'm trying to create an image of an incredibly simple delivery system to turn these things on.
Self-organizing system, like these little robots that would go and find anything that has an electrical current and just attach itself and say, you're now part of my network.
And maybe it just uses, ambient energy,
Okay, so any of you guys
sunlight.
have one of these? Just checking.
Nobody? Let me know.
Let
if
him
you
know.
got one.
Okay, Suzanne, I'm going to go to you next. You can make one acquisition to expand liquid.
So trying to give a personal experience in for the banking industry is more difficult due to all the security and personalization.
Yeah.
So to have, to break through that security issue either through some type of 3D, you have to opt in of course, but some kind of 3D modeling that when you walk into a bank or you walk into something, they know it's you and everything about you. That would be wonderful.
Very cool. Okay, so and they would know me maybe through facial recognition. They would know me through any of the many clues. So Facebook knows I'm not a cat. We're that far. Okay, that's good. Rob, how about for you? You're in the M&A business.
Yeah, I would say a drone company. So drones are, there's the, unpractical use cases, and then there's some real practical use cases for drones, and it's only going to be picking up more steam. If you think about their streaming data, heavy visualization, and you got to apply the analytics. So I really think drones are,
Anybody here from Villanova? I had dinner with some Villanova folks last night. Sandy runs the drone thing over there, so that'll be her comment. Okay, we've got about a minute left. So kind of last thought. There's a thought you'd like to leave people with in terms of it's a digitalizing world. Kind of where are we? And I've got one for me. But I'll start maybe with you, Paul, and just one last thought.
Sure. Look, you got to get started. I mean, years ago, buying a cell phone was a traumatic experience because we picked the wrong platform or the wrong device or the wrong carrier. All of that dissolves over time as the barriers to entry go away. So starting something with sensing that attaches to data and analytics that gets a better user interaction, you will do it wrong. Why wait 6 months to do it wrong? Do it wrong in 6 weeks so that you can then pivot into what you learned is best next
So some
step.
version of agile, fast follow.
And just get moving. Start
get
tomorrow.
moving. Okay.
I would say the same exact thing, and we're doing this with a utility where, they need to track barrels of wire. Believe it or not, when they're on a job, they don't know where the wire is. So very simple use case. You just put a beacon, Bluetooth, $12 beacon onto a barrel of wire. You put a tablet for $100 onto the truck. It's not even connecting into the transmission system, I should say. And then you get $100 a month for unlimited data. Try that use case out, and now you're going to know where your assets are at any given time. So,
Suzanne, any last thought?
Yep, I'll just go back to, you have a lot of data. Start with understanding your customers and your operations better and document everything. Just like Google wanted to own all the data and they saved everything, collected everything, save everything. So as you go fast, you might learn later, you wish you saved that and you have it and you can start running more analysis on it.
There's a kind of like anthropological research idea implied in Suzanne's thing, which is it's the drive along with. Because inevitably, I'll tell about my final, so the punchline for all of this is, yes, it would be good if you were technologically informed, but it's really about use cases. And so what you really want to sharpen your sense for is use case. I'll do the drive along one with the last one. I was working with HP many, many years ago. They had a flatbed scanner that was the best in class in their product, and they had warehouses full of them, and they could not figure out what was going on because it was the best scanner ever. So we did a drive along. We went to the first customer. We come to the cubicle where the scanner is. There's a flower pot on top of the scanner. Oh, so anyway, listen, it's use cases. That was our thing about adoption. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn the program back over, I guess, to the voice of God. Thanks.